Hello, hello. Welcome to Your Home by Design, the podcast where we talk all about our homes and how they affect our health and well-being. Some episodes we delve deep into the research and some we just chat. I'm Nico, an interior designer and researcher passionate about bringing forward the findings so that you can improve your lifestyle and well-being. Grateful to have you. Let's do this. Welcome to today's podcast. Today, we're going to chat about the reset. From time to time in your personal life, you hit the reset when things feel overwhelming, too busy, or you need a big change, like a new job, your health, or your fitness. You look at situations and decide to hit the reset. All of a sudden, you pump the brakes. But here's the thing. There is another reset button you need. It's not just in your personal life, but in your home. Your home needs to evolve with you. So if you want a lifestyle change, then you can make changes in your home to ignite the change or support the change. Today, we dive into the home reset. I'll share why this is so important, how it benefits you, and what you will notice from a home reset. Let's go. So a reset in our personal lives is something you do when you notice that something needs to change. You recognize there's something that's just not working for you. There's something that is causing you stress or frustration, sadness, or it's depleting you in some way. And when you realize you need to make a change, that moment is exciting. When you realize and start the process, you almost approach it with optimism and excitement. Even if it's a tough time, you realize that you need that change, so you hit the reset. You make a goal, a plan, and you kind of get to see how things can improve. And the hope is that whatever the reset is that it becomes almost a new normal for you, a new something that transforms your life in whatever way, shape, or form you need. A reset in the home is similar to the reset in your personal life. And I love the topic of home reset because I don't think a life reset can happen without a home reset. The personal reset is often triggered by either health goals like fitness and diet, job goals like advancement or change of career. Mood can trigger a reset. If you're not feeling happy, it causes you to look at your life to figure out why. Even the pace of life can cause a reset. So if you're feeling too busy and overwhelmed, then you might need to pump the brakes. So when we look closely at what triggers resets in our personal lives, the personal reset and the home reset are connected. From time to time, we need resets. It's all about the pendulum. How far will you let the pendulum go before you need to bring it back, before you need to realign and reset? If you picture that pendulum swinging, then before a reset can happen, there's something that needs to take place. You've noticed things aren't right. There's a misbalance. It's not weighted. Something has triggered this observation. Then you have to recognize that it needs to swing back and what needs to happen to tip the scale. And then when it swings back and alignment takes place, you have to maintain it. You have to check in and observe so that it remains on middle ground, consistently balanced for a time. But one thing we know is resets happen throughout our lives. So even if we find consistency and balance, we need the reset to check in, realign, and observe if a change in our lives is needed as our lives unfold. No matter what it is in life, right? We get going on certain schedules, routines, diet changes, our interests. We go down this path or we make this decision, and weeks, months, and years can go by before we look back and wonder what the heck happened. Like, how did we get this far off course? How did we go this long without stopping and doing a reset? And a major variable in this that's overlooked when you're focusing on doing a personal reset is your home. Your home and the spaces within, the way it's decorated and designed, cleaned, and organized can be a useful tool to support that reset, or it can even jumpstart that reset. Home resets can be really telling because you can look at it from both sides. In your personal life, it can be a catalyst for change or a pillar for change. A catalyst, which causes it to happen, is what propels the change, and a pillar supports the changes you've made. I'm going to give you some examples on using the home reset as a catalyst for change or a pillar for change towards the end of this episode. But first, I just want to share why a home reset is so important. So why is the home reset so important? Well, it's important because it allows you to evaluate your life and make sure your home and life are in balance. Does your home support your lifestyle and vice versa? It's often when we get busy and distracted that we stop addressing things, right? We get going in life and we accept where things are at and we get so busy and it's almost like it's a mad dash to the finish line each and every single day. So much so that you overlook the ways to improve your spaces. So not only do I think that you should look at your home whenever you make a life reset, but you should also evaluate the home reset often to make sure it's not a cause of you feeling out of alignment. A reset is a beautiful thing. It allows you to take a step back and evaluate, to take a close look and get clear. And with a home reset, it's really about evaluating how your spaces are working for you or against you in relation to your personal reset. All the research I've done on how the home affects us tells us that the choices we make in our spaces, in our direct environment, in our rooms, tells us that there is a connection between how our home is designed and our health and well-being. So what happens in your brain and your body as a result is of utmost importance, and in my opinion, very important to consider when doing a home reset. In a perfect world, you would create a space and it would stay that way. You would love it forever and it would just stay as is, beautiful, clean, organized, super stylish, relevant, intentional. But the reality is our homes are always changing. They change with your schedule. So if your schedule is an early morning home workout, then for a time that room might double as your gym. Getting out the door with kids or heading to work. We shape the place as we move through it. Your home changes with stages in life, working from home for a time versus working out of your home. Or you age out of certain things like styles or colors or even functional needs. Your home changes when you get into a certain hobby or activity that might require certain storage or room designation. And your home changes with time because over time you accumulate more things. Over time you evolve, your patterns change, and over time the physical home gets tired. Paint can start to chip and fade. Dust can settle in all its crevices. Things get worn and need to be replaced. Materials fade and start to break down. When your home starts changing without you noticing and resetting to your current needs or to bring health and happiness, that's when it can have negative effects. It can affect your health and your well-being. If your home isn't bringing you joy, if your home doesn't feel fresh, if your home doesn't tell your story, if you don't notice it, like you just don't notice things in your home and find inspiration from the things in your home, all of this is affecting you. If you currently don't look at your home as a way to create positive change in your life, then I am so happy you are listening. If you live where you live out of circumstance, and that circumstance isn't what you would have chosen, then it's even more important to design your home to boost your health and your well-being. If circumstance has brought you to live where you live and you don't love your home when you walk in that door, then it's time for a reset. Or even if you're behind on your cleaning and things are dusty, this impacts your health and your outlook on your home. It even stops natural light from reflecting off the surfaces. If your space is disorganized, then it can cause your brain to be disorganized, which affects all aspects of your life. It can also stop you from inviting people over to your house, which causes feelings of shame and embarrassment. If you've overlooked the design of important rooms like your bedroom, You haven't created opportunities there to experience joy, like waking up and seeing fresh flowers, or seeing a tree outside your window, or colors that help you wind down so you can sleep and wake up refreshed. You need to do a home reset and be hopeful of how the reset is going to impact you. Just as you are mindful of your diet reset or your exercise reset, you have to be mindful of your home reset. If you're just plugging along and not really paying attention to how your home should look and feel to help you, then you kind of become a bit like your home. Like the state of your home can often affect your state. If you look at your spaces when they're, say, a mess, and you ask yourself, like, how do I feel right now? How am I moving through life right now? Do I feel in control even though I look at my house and it's a mess? Chances are, if your house is a mess, you also feel like a mess. You feel scattered, you feel rushed, you feel disorganized. If you've ever moved and had a ton of boxes around you and some of your stuff that you use regularly is still in boxes, then you know how that makes you feel, right? And how that really affects your mental state. It's no different if your belongings aren't organized or intentionally placed to look and feel good. If you look at your home and it's dirty and dated, how does that make you feel? How is this impacting your life, your day-to-day living, your routines? When you've done a home reset, your spaces feel intentional. And intentionality can help you keep a positive mindset, and intentional spaces are felt. I love this. I love when you walk into a space and it feels intentional. And everyone can feel this when they walk into a home. Anything that is intentional has had forethought and consideration. It always amazes me how this can translate to a feeling in home design, a feel in that space. A reset can cause you to feel more confident. You feel happier. It can increase your social life because let's face it, when someone pops over or knocks on your door, you don't hide or pretend not to be home or apologize for the mess, or feel embarrassed because of various aspects about your space. A home reset can even save you time. If you can imagine knowing where things are or being very intentional and your space feels well designed, moving through it, it can save you time thinking about things. It can cut through the noise, right? It can help you feel happy too, because, if you've thought about things, then you're intentionally putting things in places to feel joy, and nothing feels better when you can move through a home and feel good. It can allow you to wind down properly. It can take away feelings of guilt, and it can even increase low moods. So what does a home reset look like? Well, first, it's really about paying attention to the trigger. And as I mentioned earlier, the reset can be used as a catalyst or a pillar. The reset of both of these can be triggered by many things. This is where observation is really crucial. Your body is telling you a lot, and often a trigger can come from an emotion or a physical cue. So just ask yourself, basically, how do I feel when I'm in my space? Do you feel overwhelmed? Do you feel sad? Does your body physically hurt when you sit in certain furniture? Look for emotional cues and physical triggers. Pay attention to how you are feeling. Those triggers will inform you on when and where in your home you need to hit the reset. Triggers can also be about what is going on in our lives and making sure we set our home up to support what's going on. So let's say you have a very busy job, or your kid's schedule is really, really busy. Well, what can you do to support that? First thing would be to make sure that your home is organized. If your kids have a big schedule, how are you coming alongside and supporting them to be able to execute that schedule, and to not add to it, and I think if you have a really busy life, then you also might want to look at how you can design a space to totally wind down and disengage. Back to that pendulum, right? It's about saying, I am so busy in my life. What can I do within my home to create areas of rest? Or what can I look at and say, this needs to be simplified? So you might even have visual obstructions going on. So let's say you've got very, very busy walls. You've just gone crazy with different colors or just so much going on. There's clutter, there's colors, there's patterns, there's shapes, there's just too much. It's almost overwhelming. Well, if you've got a busy life, you might want to look at that and say, how can we pull this back a bit? How can we tone it down and make it feel calmer? And that often starts with purging and getting rid of things, and then really looking at each item that you're choosing to put in that room and saying, is this important functionally and aesthetically? Does this bring me joy? Is it comfortable? Is it in a good use of the intended purpose? And then creating joy and focal points and finding things that excite you and help you to just have that contrast in your life. Swing that pendulum back to find that balance and make sure that if your life is crazy busy, if your body is telling you need to slow down, but that might not be possible in your personal life, then how can we create the home to support that? So yeah, pay attention to those triggers. Pay attention to your activities in life. Pay attention to how your body is feeling throughout the day, whether you're feeling stressed. Is there a certain time of day that your triggers, are showing up? So just really observe those triggers, observe your emotions, where your eye is going as well, your attention. So if your reset is a catalyst for change, you've recognized that you need a reset in your life. A catalyst is going to get you there. It's about understanding and saying, my house can be designed, decorated, and organized to get me there. So it's about addressing your needs. If you're feeling out of control in life, as I mentioned, if your job is nuts and you need to calm things down in your home, right? I mean, things are going too fast and you can't keep up or keep track, then, do a home reset. Get that home running smooth and streamlined. Make sure you have organized, purged, decluttered, done that interior editing, and making those intentional style and design choices, as I mentioned. If you need your personal life to feel in control, then think about what an in control house would look like. How would an in control house feel? If you're wanting more social connection in life, think about how your home can support that so that you no longer avoid companionship, or you're worried about people coming over, or you're embarrassed about certain things. It may be that you need to update some things and change some things up, creating a focal point to distract the eye from the thing that's bothering you, or changing how your focal point looks. Creating something more pleasing, something that excites you. And there are times where you might need to do a complete interior overhaul, which leads to a totally new space. Or it may be as simple as doing a deep clean and then just hanging up some new artwork that brings you joy and changes up your space. Or even, a fresh coat of paint to sort of simplify and freshen things up. So these are catalysts for change. And the reset is the first step in this. If you do this reset, then you will notice a positive change in your life. Then there's the pillar for change. This is when a personal change has happened to you and you simply need to evaluate your home to support it. If your job is more demanding and you don't have as much time to clean, then you might need to address the rules around how your home needs to function or be maintained. Or, you've implemented a new workout schedule and you're working out from home. And now you have to look at the room you do this in and figure out how to arrange it to not only support this, to make it easy, but how to change it back when you're not working out and have it still look good, if this room is going to be a multifunctional space. Or a pillar might be you travel and you want to continue traveling. So you might look at adding art and things that remind you of those travels so that it remains important in your day-to-day life. And I know that you have already had some resets. You've already experienced a home reset. You probably didn't call it that, or you may not have recognized what it was and what was actually taking place. But no doubt you have felt this. I'm sure you have redesigned a room, or you've bought something to update a space, like accessories or furniture. You've probably changed up your decor. Your space has evolved, or you've really critiqued how you want it to look from a style perspective, or, you've done a reno. Like, you have absolutely come to a point where you decided to make a change. You noticed that something in your home didn't feel right. Something was just off to you, or just straight up, you just wanted an improvement. And, maybe it wasn't because you were using this as a tool to either be a catalyst or a pillar. You were just recognizing, you were paying attention to your emotions, and that those emotions were telling you something needs to change. Something's not right. And I love what happens after this. The feelings that come from doing a reset. If you think to a time where you've changed something up in a space, or you've refreshed it, it's gotten a new look, or you've renoed it to be more functional, how good you feel after. You can clearly see the effects that it has on your life. All of a sudden, are you taking more pride in your space, putting things away, cleaning up after yourself, being more intentional in making it look pretty. Maybe you've got a vase with fresh flowers in your kitchen because it's so clean and you enjoy coming into that space now that you're going to add to it. You're just staying on top of things a little bit more. You can even feel more empowered in your life. You may have felt that you have a bit more time, that you're able to think more clearly. You even just might notice your spaces more and find that you really love them. You can just, stay more organized and you interact with your spaces differently once you've done a reset. It just feels good, doesn't it? So as we come to the end of today's episode, I just want to remind you of the beauty of home, the ability for our homes to play a huge part in our lives. You spend a lot of your precious time thinking about your spaces and how to make them better. You want to live in a home that represents you, one that's designed well and styled to your taste and your story, one that makes you happier and healthier. Your home can be a catalyst for change in your personal life, helping you get to where you need to go. And it can also be a pillar for change as you move through your days making those choices and changes. But always remember that your home is a big part of your life. The meaning of home, the heart of home, and sometimes that home needs a reset. It needs a reset to be in alignment with who you are and who you're becoming. Thank you for listening to today's episode.